this, it's a complete serverless stack, right? So you're using DynamoDB, serverless. You're using Lambda, serverless again. And then we'll be using API Gateway, again serverless. Now API Gateway helps us, enables anybody across the world to interact with our Lambda function, right? So we'll be deploying all these three things from the AWS console, right? We'll be using the AWS console, and then we'll make settings for all these three things, and we'll deploy all of this. And anybody across the world can use our Lambda function. So this is more like a real world scenario. So I'm in my terminal now, and you don't really have to keep this project in your Go root, because since Golang 1.12 anyways they had, Go mod init, which we're going to do anyways out here. Go mod init takes care of everything. I mean, you don't have to really do anything manually. All right. So here we'll say, we'll make a directory first. We'll say go serverless and YT. All right. And we'll cd into this, go serverless stack YT. For YT is basically YouTube. I'm making this project for YouTube specifically. All right. And here I'll say go mod init, and which is basically github.com/Akhil/go serverless YT. So that's my project. It's initialized go mod for me. Go mod is basically like my package.json file. If you're from a JavaScript background, it'll have all my dependencies for me, easily listed out. So now what I can do is I can just open this project up in code editor, which is VS Code in my case. Just as a pointer, right? I'm using Windows. Inside Windows, I have something called as WSL. Inside that, I'm using Ubuntu 20.04, and I use multiple different versions of Ubuntu, right? And for this particular video, I'm using Ubuntu 20.04, and in my Ubuntu 20.04 instance, I have VS Code set up. All right. Now, I don't want to install a lot of extensions for Golang, because I know when I'll start writing a lot of code, I'll make some mistakes, right, with Golang. I'll make some mistakes, but I will fix them. So don't worry. I don't have extensions because I don't want to start, ballooning up my instance, because this is just one of the instances that I use on my Windows PC for Ubuntu. I have like 10-15 different versions of Ubuntu, right? So if you're new to Golang, by the way, main.go file is your main file, right, in the project. And this is how you start a main.go file. You say package main and you say import, and because you'll import some packages, right? Not everything you'll have inside Golang. Golang is very modular. You have to install a lot of external packages, and a lot of packages that come with Golang. You have to specifically tell that I need this package from Golang. And so the third-party packages that we'll be using will be mostly around Lambda. All right. So we'll talk about them in a while. And then the most important thing here will always be funcmain, because that's your entry point into the program, right? The funcmain. Now, before I start writing anything in main.go file, what I'll do is I'll just try and create like a very simple project structure. I need the build folder, right? Because I'm going to keep my build of this entire project in my build folder, and I'm going to zip it up, and then I'm going to take that zip file to my Lambda. My AWS Lambda console. All right. So that's why I need the build folder, and I need my CMD folder, because that's where I usually keep my main.go. Sorry, not in the build, but in my CMD folder, I keep my main.go file. All right. And then you'll have a package folder. So if you worked with Golang before, this is like the very standard kind of structure, right? Nothing new. So package will, as you already know, will have handlers. Right, handlers to handle the APIs, and then I'll have a folder for user. I'll explain to you why I'm doing that, and then I'll have a very simple validation function. So I'll keep that in a folder called validators. Sorry, that's it. Yeah. So in validators, I will have just one little file of barely like 5-6 lines of code, I think. It's just going to be is email valid, just to check if my email is valid for the user. And here in my user, I'll have a file called user.go. All right. In my handlers, that's where my main logic resides. So this is a very short, very small project. Handlers, I'll just have 2 files. I'll have API response.go, because I need this file for my API gateway. When I'll build it, you'll understand what it is. And then it's handlers.go. Right now, my user.go file is kind of a combination of my models and my almost like my controllers as well. So I have handlers, but user.go file will have a lot of code which talks to my database. All right, directly talks to my database. So I'll have those models, like those structs as well. At the same time, I'll have model functions, database functions at the same time. I'll head over to your main.go file. In funcmain, I think what I'll do is I'll start with this place, right? I'll say os.get environment AWS region. So AWS region is very important because that's where your Lambda will go and sit, right? So with AWS, if you've worked with AWS a lot, you know that AWS has different regions, right? So my particular AWS is configured with India, which is Asia Pacific South 1. If you have been using AWS CLI and if it's set up, it'll be amazing. Otherwise, also, I don't think you should have a problem, right? But just try and set up AWS CLI. It's very easy. It's just a 5-minute process, and it'll be very simple for you to follow along with all of my other videos as well, because in my other videos, it's a prerequisite. So how do you create a session? So you'll say session.new session. Now, if I'm calling this OS here, right? So I need to have OS here. That's the package, right? And if I'm calling session here, session is something that AWS gives me. So I'll say github.com/ Now I'm looking at the documentation for the AWS packages at the same time. You can do that. Otherwise, in case you're the type of person who wants to know exactly which package you're installing, because I'm that type of person. I don't want to install any extra packages, right? So if you're like me, you might want to open up, just like I've done, you might want to open up the AWS SDK, it's called. So I'll say AWS/AWS SDK for Go. You want to open up the documentation, and here you'll say AWS/session. All right, and to create the new session, you'll say AWS.config, and the bracket, which will be curly braces bracket, you'll say region AWS.string. Inside that, you'll pass the region. All right. All right. And then, as you know, with everything to do with Golang, whenever we get two things usually, right? We get the thing that we're looking for, which is the AWS session, which will come from the session function, right? The new session function, which is a part of the session package that we have here. And we get the error. So with Golang, you have to keep handling errors, and this is a very neat and clean way of handling errors, because at every stage you know where the error is coming from and you can handle it there itself. So if there's an error, just return. All right. And I want to create a variable called DynaClient, which for my DynamoDB, and .new. And how do you create a new client? You'll say AWS session. Perfect, which you've just created out here. So you've created the session, and then you'll say lambda.start and handler. So this you may not understand right now, not a problem. So firstly, we want DynamoDB. How do you get DynamoDB? You get it like this. It'll say github.com/AWS/AWS SDK go /service/DynamoDB. All right. So you have session, you have DynamoDB, and you want AWS itself in the first place. So you'll say github.com/AWS SDK go /AWS. To get this lambda function, the Lambda package, which has the start function. You need the start function. What you'll do is you'll say github.com/AWS/AWS lambda go/lambda. Cool. So far so good. That's what I needed, you know. And I need something called as the handler, which we'll talk about in a while. Okay. For now, I'm creating a constant called table name. Its table name is lambda user. I'll say lambda in go user. And now it's time to create my handler, which is this basically. So I'm passing my handler there. In my handler, what I'm doing is I have a request. Basically, I accept some things, right, in this function, and I return some things, and it has some definition. So what does it accept? Accepts events dot API gateway proxy request. So you're wondering what's events, right? So events is basically what Golang Lambda will give us. So I'll come here and I'll say github.com/AWS/AWS lambda go/events. Perfect. And the other thing that this accepts is star events.api gateway proxy response. Sorry, I meant that it accepts a request, returns a response. I'm not sure what I said actually before that. What I'm trying to say here is that, you know, this is a function that accepts something and returns something. Obviously accepts a request, obviously returns a response, right? No complication there. That's what you wanted to do. And what you'll do here is you'll switch with the HTTP method. So you'll say switch, you'll say request dot HTTP method. So what are the HTTP methods that you have? You have get, post, put, and delete. That's all you have. So for every single different HTTP method, we want to call a different function. How do you do that? So you'll say switch. Sorry, we've already switched, right? We already switched. It's like it's 8:30 here, so I'm kind of sleepy. I usually get sleepy at 11 p.m., but somehow today I'm sleepy earlier because I woke up really early. I've joined this martial arts class that you know gets me to wake up at 5 a.m. these days. So so you'll have something called as handlers, right? And where will those handlers come in from? It's basically these handlers that you want to import. So which are basically your own creation. The handlers are your own creation. So you'll say github.com/go serverless yt/package/handlers. Cool. So you're saying to Golang is that this is my project, github.com/go serverless yt. Inside that I have a folder called package. Inside I have a package called handlers, right? And handlers, the file, on top of that file we'll say package handlers, and it belongs to the handlers folder. Then Golang understands, okay, that this is what we're talking about. All right, so that's the format. I mean, the folder name and the package name have to be the same. Just letting you know in case you didn't know that. I mean, I'm pretty sure you knew that, but I'm just making sure, right? So you have request, table name, and Dyna client, right? So you send this to this function called handlers.getUser, which we'll work on in a while. So that was your case get. Now you have more cases, right? You have depending on the HTTP method. So you have post, you'll have put, and you'll have delete. For post, you'll say return handlers dot create user. Again, you'll pass request, comma, table name, comma, DynaClient. For put, you'll pass return handlers dot update user request, comma, request, comma, table name, comma, DynaClient. And for delete, we'll just do handlers dot delete user, and same things, you'll pass the same things, comma, DynaClient. And after delete, you'll just give it a default. If you work with switch and case statements, you obviously know there's a default, right? And try to keep the indentation same. It won't affect it, but it's just a good habit, you know. I mean, I don't do it many times, but you know, I try to do it these days. All right. So by default, you want to call this function called unhandled method, which is again in your handlers file or handlers package. And this is the entire picture. I mean, I don't think we're missing anything. We have the OS package down here. We have events, Lambda, AWS session, DynamoDB. Yeah, there's one more package. Actually, if you look at the AWS SDK document, then you want to import AWS SDK go /service /DynamoDB /DynamoDB iFace. Just keep these packages. And what I think we should do is we should just say go mod tidy. So it'll get us all the packages that we've just talked about. And usually, like many times, I do this at the end of the video, right? But this time I'm just doing it beforehand itself, because many people, they kind of start freaking out. Hey, you're installing all these packages. You've not run the command go mod tidy, or you're making so many mistakes, man, while typing. Why don't you install some extensions? I've explained to you why I don't install extensions, right? So with Golang, I mean, what happens is that, we usually come from JavaScript kind of a background, and then we think that, if you're making all these mistakes, then the complete program will crash and it'll be difficult to solve it. But with Golang is very different from other programming languages, right? Make as many mistakes as you want, and once you run the program, Golang will really handle everything for you. It'll tell you which line, what's the problem. It's quite intelligent, right? It's not like your regular other programming languages like JavaScript. So here, one thing that we missed out was to create this DynaClient in the first place, right? So the DynaClient as in the variable, and defining the type of variable that DynaClient is. So what type of variable will be? That's where we'll use this DynamoDB iFace, right? We'll say dot DynamoDB API. Just make sure you get this right, all right? So that's your main file. Your main file is complete. And now you want to start handling handlers. So since these two files belong to the same folder called handlers, we want it to both to be package handlers, right? So we'll say package handlers, right? That's clear till now, I'm hoping. And after writing the package, you say import, and then you have your main func. For in this case, the main function of this file is called API response. Accepts some things, returns some things, and has a function definition. What does it accept? Accepts status, which is int, and body, which has an interface what does it return? It returns events dot API gateway proxy response, comma, error. Right. For importing, you'll say encoding slash JSON and github.com slash AWS slash AWS Lambda Go slash events. Okay. All we're doing with this is basically defining the response, right? So you'll say response is equal to events dot API gateway response. And the response, you're just setting the headers. Pretty standard, because the way we're going to set up these headers are something that you've already seen so many times, which is basically content type and application JSON. So we're saying that we're returning JSON from our Lambda function, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. So we'll say response dot status code is equal to status. And status will be basically your like 400, 300, something like that. And then you'll say string body, comma, JSON.marshal body. So you, if you've been with Golang, you already know what's marshalling and demarshalling, unmarshalling, is. Golang doesn't understand JSON on its own, so it needs the help of JSON marshalling, which is part of this encoding slash JSON package. And so whenever you send some JSON from Postman into Postman or maybe terminal, wherever you send some JSON, it basically, we want Golang to understand it, and also the information that Golang produces, for it to become JSON and send it as a response, that also needs help. Golang needs help with both, so that's why it's called marshalling and unmarshalling. There are hundreds of videos about it on YouTube. You can check it out. Nothing fancy or nothing complicated. You have to do that in almost all the other languages, right, which are not JavaScript, which is like basically Java and Python. All these languages, you have to do something like that, right? Because any language that's not JavaScript does not understand JSON by default, because JSON is JavaScript object notation. So this is your API response.go. All right, that's it. I mean, there's nothing much going on here in this file. But the other file in handlers, package handlers, this is where we're going to spend some time, because obviously there will be a lot going on here, right? So the main functions that usually will be there will be based on our main.go file. So main.go file requires get user function, create user, update user, delete user, and unhandled method. So these are the functions that obviously that you need to create, right? So you'll say get user, and you'll say create user, you'll say update user and delete user. So func update user and delete user. All right, so here the last function that we want to keep here is unhandled method, right? So for, let's say, if somebody uses the patch method, because we're handling get, post, put, delete. If somebody uses patch, then we'll say that, hey, it's not handled, right? So we'll say unhandled method. Accept some things, return some things, and has a function definition. All right. So this is, in general, this is how your handlers file is going to be like. And what we can do is we can work on our is email validated valid file. So we'll say package validators. And there's a package that you get with Golang. It's called regular expressions. And we're just creating a simple function where we're just checking if the email is valid or not. Right? Really simple. All it does is accepts an email string and returns a boolean like true or false. We'll take a variable called rxEmail. We'll use the regular expression package. And if you look at the regular expression documentation, like I have in front of me, go to the Golang official documentation and check out the regular expression package. I highly recommend you to open it if you want, because that's what I've done out here in my other screen. We'll use the function called mustCompile. And I'm going to copy and paste a regular expression string here. You don't really need to understand what this does. You just get it directly from the documentation. But if you really want to know, basically, you're just checking if the numbers are between A to Z, A to Z, and 0 to 9, that kind of stuff, right? That's all it's doing. And it's also checking for @ symbol, right? That means, obviously, if it's an email, it needs to have an @ right? So those kind of things, just basic email validation check is happening out there. Do check out the regular expression document if you want to really understand what this regular expression does, all right? But if you want to save time, just copy and paste it like I just did. And now we want to check the length of email. If length of email is less than 3, or length of email is more than 254, or our rxEmail variable dot match string, then you'll just return false, right? So this returns either true or false. If these conditions are not met, then you return false, otherwise you return true. That means everything is fine and email is valid, right? Obviously, if this is not proper, it's not working properly, if length is more, length is less, we'll say the email is not valid, otherwise we'll say it's true. You can change these numbers as you want, but I've kept them to be 3 and 254, all right? You can change it on your taste. So now we'll go to our user.go file. And we'll just, at a very 10,000 feet level, I'll just set up this file. Now what I want should happen is that from my handlers, like the main control, that will go to the main file to our, to this function basically. And this function is calling the get user function and create user function, update user. And all these functions are, as you know, mentioned in the handlers, right? And from the handlers, you'll call the functions in your user.go file. And these functions will be actually the database functions that actually talk to the database, right? So every function that you have here, except for the unhandled method, because it doesn't do much, these 4 CRUD functions that we have, they have an equivalent function in your user.go file. A complete like 1:1 function in your user.go file that talks to the database. All right, so let's do that. Let's create those functions. So firstly, as you know, when we start off a file, we import some things, and then here I'll also want to define some variables, some errors that I want to define. So the functions that I want to have here in my user.go file, which will have 1:1 relationship with these 4 functions. The first function will be called, I'll call it fetch user. So what that means is my get user function gets called in my handlers, and this function will call in my user.go file the fetch user function, which directly gets the user from the database itself. The database in this case being DynamoDB, all right? So it accepts some things, returns some things, and it has a function definition. Simple. The second function that I want to have is for getting multiple users actually. So I'll say func fetch users. Similarly, it'll look very similar. Then I want to have a create function. So I'll have create user. And then it has update user. Yeah, you just have to keep looking here and then creating these functions. And then you have the last one is delete user, right? So you'll come here. right? If it doesn't get deleted, then you don't have to return anything specific, special. You can just return an error. That's why from the return here is just an error, right? And that's about it. So we have 1:1 functions, all of these, but one extra function is there, which is fetch users. All right. So we'll see where to use it. So from a 10,000 feet perspective, this is your user.go file, and this is your handlers file. So what we'll do is we'll start working on our handlers function, and then at the same time we'll start working on our user.go functions. And here you'll obviously import some things, right? The first thing that I need is net/http. Then I need my Lambda event. So I'll say github.com/aws/aws lambda go/events. Now it's possible that I'm importing these, but you're not understanding why I'm importing these, so you might get confused. So now there are two ways to do it. One is when I'm actually writing the code, and then I use this events packet somewhere, and then I come up and import it. Or I know which ones I need, so I'll just import them right in the beginning itself, so that I can use them later on. So I'm just doing this. So try not to get confused, because we'll actually be using these packages in just like 2-3 minutes. Don't worry, why we're importing them, where will we use it. So please be patient. /AWS. Right. So these are the same packages that we've already used in our main.go file. And we'll say github.com/aws/aws. Okay, go/service/DynamoDB/DynamoDB iFace. Great. One thing that I need here, because I would want to call these functions like I told you, right? I want to call these functions. So that's why I want to import this user package in my handlers file. How would I do that? I would say github.com/akhil/go serverless yt /package/user. So inside package, inside the user package, we've imported it here. All right. And then before I get started with these functions, I want to define a variable called error method not allowed is equal to method not allowed. And why do I need to create this? Because firstly, we'll be working on this function, unhandled method, right? So that's why we want to call this function. So here, this returns an event, API gateway event. So we'll say API gateway proxy response, comma, error. Right? So we'll just send a response from here, or we'll just send an error. And here you'll say return API response. The response that you want to send is HTTP dot. When we say HTTP, we are talking about the HTTP package, net/HTTP package. All right. Status method not allowed, comma, header method not allowed, which we have just defined together, right? That's what we are saying. So we are saying that we have something for get, post, put, and delete, but we don't have something for patch. So patch or any other method that somebody plans to use. So if you get something like that, like an unhandled method, so you'll send a response saying that, hey, this method is not allowed. All right. And I want to create another variable, but it's actually a struct, right? So it's an error body, and I'll be using it a lot. So just bear with me as to why I'm creating it. This struct has a variable called error message, which has string error, comma, commit empty. Cool. Now for your get user, you accept something and return something here. For a get user, what do you accept? What does the function get? You get a request, right, from Postman. The request that you get is part of this events packet. So you'll say events dot API gateway request, comma, table name, which is string, comma, Dyna client dot Dynamo DB API. And what does it return? It returns a response, obviously. So we'll say events dot API gateway proxy response, comma, error. Straightforward. And actually, these two things, right? What's going to accept and what's going to return is going to be used by all of the functions. So what you'll do is you'll just copy and you'll just paste it here for create user, for update user as well, and for delete user as well. Awesome. So we've done a lot of heavy lifting. Now we want to start working on the function definitions for all these functions. Right? So the first thing that you'll say is email request dot query string parameters email. So if you've guessed, what's happening here is you want to get the user, but by using the email ID of that user. So from a request, you'll have your query string parameters, which we'll pass as email, and that we're going to capture in a variable called email. And then we'll check the length. So we'll say if length of email is greater than 0, then you'll get a single user. So you'll say user dot fetch user, which we've just created together, right? We've not created the definition, but you know which function I'm talking about. It's in my user package, which I've imported here already. So fetch user is going to take the email, table name, and Dyna client. And I'm going to capture this in the result, or there's going to be an error. And if there's an error, I'll handle the error. So I'll say if error not equal to nil, return API response, HTTP dot status bad request, comma, error body. So error body is a struct that I've already defined, and in error body I want to pass AWS dot string error dot error. And otherwise you'll say HTTP dot everything is okay, so you'll say status okay if everything goes well, and you'll pass the result from this function. Now if you want multiple users, you'll say user dot fetch users, same thing, table name, Dyna client. And what you'll do is you'll again use result and error to capture the values coming from this function. And if there's an error, and you'll check if error is not equal to nil, you'll return the API response saying HTTP dot status bad request, because there's an error, right? And you'll send the error body. Just like we did earlier, error body is the struct that we've already defined. That's the error body that we are sending, which is basically a JSON. And here the error body, inside that, what are you going to send? You're going to send aws.string error.error. Got it? But if everything went well and there was no error, then we're going to return API response and HTTP dot status okay, comma result. So basically that's your get user. Now what we can do is we can work on our fetch user and fetch users, both of these functions in our user.go file. or we can work on our create user function in our handlers. So I think I'll do the former. I'll work on fetch users and I'll work on fetch user. Let me just check if everything is recording. Yes, everything is recording perfectly. And I need to keep making sure, otherwise, I end up making a long video when nothing has recorded, and that leads to a big problem. All right, so before I do anything with users, I want to first create a user, right? So like I said, this file is a mix of that model file that you usually create where you define the struct of how the user is going to look like. So I'll say user struct email. Now, since this user struct is small and we don't have multiple structs, like if this was a e-commerce, for example, then you would have had users and orders and all those different like products and so many different structs, right? So you'd have to have like a separate models folder for all these different models, and then you'd have database functions separately and controllers or something like that, right? But since we don't have that, we have a very small project which just has users, and users itself it's a very small struct because you just have email, first name and last name. You don't have to do much here, right? You can combine controllers and models into the same file. Now email is going to be a string which is going to say JSON, and you say like this JSON email because for Golang's purposes, it'll be email with a capital E, whereas when JSON, where it's stored, it's going to be email with a small e. So you need to tell Golang that there are two versions of it. One, the JSON version, the other is the version that Golang understands, because Golang does not understand JSON, as I've already told you. So that's why we'll also have to use some marshalling and unmarshalling to get it to understand and interact with JSON. All right. So you'll have first name and last name. And then what we'll do is we'll create our fetch user function. What does it accept? So if you actually go to handlers, you'll see the fetch user function accepts email, table name, Dyna client. So you'll say here email and table name, which is string, and your Dyna client, which is of type, you already know, DynamoDB iFace dot DynamoDB API. And it just returns a user. Obviously, you fetch user, you return that particular user, or you return an error if nothing works out. You define a variable called input, and it's of type DynamoDB dot get item input. So we'll have to define the key based on which our database function will run to find that particular user. And you already know that the user will be found from the database based on the email ID. So we'll take an email ID, and then we want to find the user that's associated with that email ID. All right. So straightforward. We'll say DynamoDB dot attribute value, and we're going to say email because we want to run a query on email. So email is equal to s is equal to aws.string dot, inside that bracket we'll pass email. Now the string is a function that is given to us by AWS package. AWS package is something that we'll have to import out here. All right. And similarly with the DynamoDB, so we'll have to also import the DynamoDB package. So come here on your import and firstly call encoding/JSON, because like I told you, Golang does not understand JSON by default. So you need encoding/JSON package to use the marshalling and unmarshalling functions, and I need the errors package also. Then I want to get my hands on the events, and I'll be using it soon to send responses, and the usual ones, as you can see, I need DynamoDB and I need AWS, so let's get those ones. So I'll say AWS/AWS SDK go/AWS, and I'll say github.com/AWS/AWS SDK go/DynamoDB. And what I'll also do, I'll also get this particular package. Yeah, let me do that for now. So I'll say github.com/aws/aws SDKs go/service/DynamoDB iFace. All right. Now coming here, you've already passed this, and after this bracket, you need to specify the table name in which this function is going to run. So we'll use the AWS string function again to pass the table name. And after this bracket, you want to use your Dyna client to finally start getting the item. Input is this basically the query that you created, right? And get item is the function that you get in Dyna client. And you'll capture that in result and error. So standard practice, if there's an error, we'll have to return the error. So we'll return nil for the value, and we'll return errors.new. Error failed to fetch record. So you must be wondering, where does this error come from? You've probably never seen this error, right? Because this is a new error that I've created on my own. How can I create my own errors? I can create my own errors like this. So error fail to fetch record is equal to fail to fetch record. And similarly, I can define any errors that I want in this variable, defined as a variable, right? So you've created a query very similar to MongoDB, right? You've created a query based on the email because you want to search for that email so that you can retrieve the user, and you've run the function get item for DynamoDB, and you've passed the query to it, and you've received that in something called as result, or you received an error. So if there's an error, you handle the error. But if the result is fine and nothing really happened, then you would do something, right? But before that, we'll create a variable called item, and it'll be basically a new user. And here you'll say error is equal to DynamoDB attribute dot unmarshal map. Okay, so DynamoDB attribute is another. By the way, if you have not opened up the DynamoDB and AWS SDK Go documentation, do that, because I have it open on my other screen. You can do that as well, and then everything will make a lot more sense, because these are actual packages inside that main package, right? So I'm using those, and once you go through the documentation, you will understand where to use which one. Or if you really don't care about that, you can just keep following along with what I'm doing. But I just recommend that you just read it, because everything will make more sense. Here I need this package, right? DynamoDB attribute. This is helping me unmarshalling the user. So first let me write the whole code. So I'll say result, sorry, not here. Here I'll put a bracket, I'll say result dot item, comma, item. And this error, if this error is not equal to nil, what we want to do, we want to return nil, comma, errors dot new error failed to unmarshal record. So you must be wondering what's happening here, right? When you get the data from your DynamoDB using the get item function into result, you want to unmarshal that into an actual user, which the front end can understand as a JSON, basically. So you use the user struct, and you take that in a variable called item, right? So item is basically a variable of type user. And then, you want the data that's coming from your result.item, you want that to be unmarshaled and brought into item. So that now whatever has come as JSON becomes, the type which is user, which is understood by Golang, and it's captured in a variable called item, right? So I've tried to explain to you every single line. In case you don't understand it, do check out what's marshalling and unmarshalling, all right? And if you have any if you still have any confusions, you can just put it in the comments below. I'll sort it out for you. But it's nothing very difficult, right? You're just taking what's coming from DynamoDB, the JSON, and you're unmarshalling it to make it into a struct, right? Which is of type user, which has email, first name, last name, something that can be understood by Golang. And you're capturing that in a variable called item, which is obviously of type user, right? That's struct that we have defined. This is standard practice. I do this in all my other videos as well. In case you're new to this channel, I have hundreds of videos on Golang. You can check all of them out. Like literally hundreds of videos on Golang, right? Check them out, build projects with me, and you'll understand everything very easily. So if everything went well, if there was an error, obviously you sent nil and you sent the errors. But if everything went well, you would return the item and then you will return nil for the error. Now you'd want to also work on the fetch users function, the plural fetch users function. How do you do that? You are passing table name there. As you can see here, you're passing table name and Dyna client. So table name has been passed, which is obviously of type string. You passed Dyna client, which is of type, you already know, DynamoDB face dot DynamoDB API. And you return multiple users. How do you return multiple users? You return basically a slice of users, wherein users is the struct that you've defined, right? So you're using a struct, you're making a slice of all those users, and then that's what you're returning. I hope that makes sense. If you don't know basics of Golang, like slices and structs, then I highly recommend you check out the basic tutorials before you get more confused. So I want to use a function that DynamoDB gives me. It's called scan input to get access to table name, which is aws.string and table name that we are already passing here. Got it? And you will say Dyna client dot scan, and you want to scan the input, the query that you just created, right? So here, as you saw, we had a more elaborate query because we had to get a particular user with email. But with fetch users, you're just getting all the users. You don't have a specific query that, okay, for this email, get a particular user. It's saying, get me all the users. So you don't have any query as such. You're just passing the table name. So that's why in your dynaclient.scan, you just pass the input. That's it. And scan is like get all, you can say that. So if you've used MongoDB, it's you have find all, something like that. Here you just have scan. Find and find one you have in MongoDB. So here you just have scan, all right? Scan and get item. So you're doing scan to get all the results, and you're going to capture that in a variable called result. And then you'll obviously, if you have an error, that standard way to handle errors is like this. You'll say return nil for the value, and you'll return an error. So you'll say errors.new, error failed to fetch record. And again, like we did out here, item, we'll define an item, right? The item here is not just a user, it's a slice of users, multiple users, because we're getting all the users from our database. And again, the same thing that we've just done here, we'll do the same thing here. So we'll say error is equal to, just copy the whole thing actually. Copy and paste. But there's only one small little change. Instead of result.item, you'll have result.items. Because obviously from your database, you'll get multiple items, multiple users. That's what you're getting. And you're returning your item, and for the error, you're returning nil. Make sense? So we've done quite a bit, right? We've already done the get user function, and get user function had fetch user and fetch users, two functions from your user.go file. Now there are three functions left here, and three functions left here because we've already taken care of the unhandled method function. You don't have to do anything more here. So just three functions left here, three functions left here, and all the other files are kind of complete, right? So if you've reached this far, congratulate yourself because you've come a long way, right? So now let's start thinking about how our create user function is going to work. All right. So for the create user function, let's start building that. There's actually not much happening there. All these functions, right? Create user, update user, delete user, they're all going to look very, very similar. So we're going to say user because you know you want to call the create user function the user package. So you'll say user dot create user, which is this function. That's what you're calling, right? And you're passing it three things: request, table name, DynaClient. Make sense? Now, whatever response this function returns, you want to capture that in a variable called result, and you'll get an error which will be captured in error. And you know the process from here. If there's an error, which means error not equal to nil, you'll return API response HTTP dot status bad request, comma, error body. And what will be in the error body? Error body in this case, by the way, is the the struct that we've already defined, right? So what's there in the error body? It's AWS dot string with a single string err dot error, comma. Okay, and you'll return API response HTTP dot status created, comma, result. So if that means if there is no error, everything goes well, then you'll say HTTP dot status created. All right, and that's about it. That's it actually. That's your create user function. There's nothing more to it. All right, and then for your update user function, very similar. You'll obviously call the user just like you did here, user dot create user. Here you'll call user dot update user method. So you'll say update user, and you'll pass three things: request, table name, and DynaClient. And you'll capture that in result, comma, error. And then you'll check again if error is not equal to nil. You'll return an API response HTTP dot again status bad request, comma, error body. Inside the error body, again the same thing. It'll result string error dot error. All right, but if everything went well, if the user did get updated, then you'll return API response, and you'll say HTTP dot status okay, that everything went well, and you'll return the result. So that means what's happening in these two functions, create user and update user, is that these two functions are being called. That means a lot of the logic, the main logic, is going to happen in these two functions, right? Because not much happened in the handlers. Similarly, let's work on our delete user function. Here you'll say user dot delete user. You'll say request, comma, table name, comma, DynaClient. Here also the only thing you'll return from here is the error, right? If the user didn't get deleted, you return the error. You don't need to return the result, any result from the delete function. So if the result is not equal to nil, you'll return API response. You know by now what we're going to say. We're going to say status bad request, and we're going to also send the error body, which will have aws.string and the error itself. But if everything went well, you would want to return the response with status OK, and you'll return nil for the error. Okay. So that's about it. And yeah, that's it. I think the entire file is complete now. We don't have anything else to do. I've also gone through the AWS SDK documentation. I don't think anything else need to be done in the handler, so everything looks all right to me. And now we'll have to work on our user.go file and all these different functions that exist on a user.go file. For your create user function, what all it's going to accept depends on what you're sending from here, which is request table name and Dana client. So here you'll say request events.api gateway proxy request, comma table name, which will be string, and Dana client, which will be, you already know, DynamoDB iFace dot DynamoDB API. So what is it going to return? It's going to return the user that has been just created or an error. So here the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a variable u, which is of type user, user being the struct that we have defined. That means u will have email, first name and last name. All right, so let's start from there. Now we'll use u. Why did we create this variable u? It's because we want to capture what's coming from Postman. So from Postman or from, let's say, the terminal, wherever, we'll send the JSON of the user with the email, first name and last name. And that data needs to be unmarshaled into u so that Golang is able to understand it and also perform any operations on it. So what you want to do is we want to use the JSON encoding /JSON package to call the unmarshal function. And what you want to do is you want to pass the request.body to it, comma ampersand u. If error is not equal to nil, and also here we'll follow the right syntax for the if statement, and if error is not equal to nil, then we'll return nil and we'll return something for the errors. We'll say error invalid user data. But we don't have this error here, right? So we don't have this error failed to unmarshal record. We don't have error invalid user data. We just have error failed to fetch record. That's all we have defined. So now let's define all the other errors. Let me define all the other errors that I'll need in this entire file in the beginning itself. So we'll say error failed to unmarshal record is equal to failed to unmarshal record and error, and I'll add error invalid user data is equal to invalid user data. Invalid email also will be there. Invalid email is equal to invalid email. Then we'll have could not marshal item, and could not delete item. So then we'll have could not put item. So we'll say error could not Dynamo put item is equal to could not dynamo put item, and user already exists. User does not exist. User does not exist. So why do I need all these errors? Obviously, by now you would have understood. I'll just give you an example that when creating a user, right? If we check if that user already exists, then we don't need to create that user. So that's why we need this kind of an error. And if we're updating a user, then or deleting a user, we can use this. That user does not exist. So why are you trying to update that user, right? That's why I'm just thinking about all type of error functions I'll need, error statements I'll need. So depending on that, I've just created them. So coming back to your create user, right? Here, now we'll start validating the email. So we'll say validators is the package that we have created together, right? This one. And the function that we created in that package is email valid, and u is the variable that you defined. And now after unmarshalling the request that you in the body of the request that you got from let's say Postman or from the terminal as JSON, you captured that in u. So now you can Golang can easily understand u because it's unmarshaled, right? It's not JSON anymore. So you can access u.email, and you can run the validation function on it. So here the spelling is wrong. So it should have been is email valid, and you'll return nil comma errors dot new error invalid email, right? And now the reason why I created this error is because I want to see if that user already exists, right? So if that user already exists, then you don't need to create it. So we need to throw an error. So we'll check if the user already exists, right? So I won't put that comment actually, I was just trying to show you. So to check if the user actually exists, you have to run the fetch user function. You'll say u.email comma table name comma Dyna client, and you'll capture whatever comes from this function in current user, and we won't handle the error. So I'll put a blank there. So if current user is not equal to nil, that means there is this user exists, right? If current user is not equal to nil, and length of current user dot email is not equal to 0, then you return nil comma errors dot new error user already exists. And so all of this if the user exists, but if the user doesn't exist, you will just save that user, right? So how do you save that? So first, to save that, obviously whatever you now have in u, you want to start marshalling it, right? So that DynamoDB can understand it now. So you'll say DynamoDB attribute dot marshal map u, and you'll capture this in AV, and you'll check for the error. So if there's an error, we'll return nil, and errors dot new error could not marshal item, which we've already defined. We've already defined this error, right? And now you want to start creating your data that you will be sending to DynamoDB. So how would you do that? You'll say DynamoDB dot put item input. Item is AV comma, table name is AWS dot string table name. And finally, you'll say DynaClient dot put item, and you'll send this input that you've defined here. Sorry, I missed the is equal to sign by mistake. Similar to fetch users, right? You created this input and then you call the DynaClient function. Similarly, you're doing that. The same thing here, you're calling the put item function. And you'll capture that in a blank character, blank variable, or you'll get an error from here, and if error is there, then you'll just handle it very easily. You'll say return nil, comma, errors dot new error could not dynamo put item, right? You have created this error already. But if everything went well, you just want to return the user, comma, nil. Awesome. So this is your create user function. And now you're left with update user and delete user. Everything else you've taken care of, right? The handlers.go file is complete, API response is complete, as email valid is complete, and main.go is complete. And I think for our user file, we have imported all the packages except for validators. So you need validators. So you'll say github.com, the validators package that you've already created. I'm talking about that one. So you'll say go serverless yt / pkg / validators. Let me also check what else am I missing. For handlers, I think I've already imported user and I don't need any more packages. For API response, I don't need more packages. For is email valid, I don't need anything else. My main.go file, probably I might have missed something. So it has handlers, it has OS, events lambda, AWS session, DynamoDB iFace. So everything is proper based on the AWS SDK Go, right? Check out this documentation. You'll know why I'm importing these packages and how I've used these functions. You already know that because you've been building it with me, all right? Then we'll come here again, back to our user.go file. And let's start working on the update user function. So what does it accept? Accepts request, which is of type events dot API gateway request, comma, table name, which is string, comma, DynaClient, which is of type DynamoDB iFace dot DynamoDB API. Returns a user, the updated user, and or it sends back an error. And we're going to do a lot of things which are going to be very similar to the create user function, which is basically we create the user. First we create the user, right? Which is the variable u, which is of type user. And we're going to unmarshal, just like we did. We're going to unmarshal the request.body that you get. So we'll say request.body, comma, ampersand u. So by mistake, so I have to close the bracket here because this is together and this is this variable u. Okay. And error not equal to nil. If you don't want to follow along, you can just copy and paste this part, right? I'm not copying and pasting because this syntax might be new to many people because it's DynamoDB, kind of working with DynamoDB. So I'm writing everything by hand. But if you want to copy and paste, if you're very comfortable with DynamoDB, go ahead and do that. You don't need to, practice along with me. Then you want to fetch the user and see if that user even exists. So you'll say u.email, comma, table name, comma, DynaClient. And you want to capture that in current user. And you want to check for that current user. So if current user not equal to nil. This is exactly what you did in the create function as well. And length of current user dot email is equal to 0. Then you'll return nil comma errors dot new error user does not exist. So for the create user function, we were checking for the user associated with that email because we wanted to see, if that user already exists, we don't want to add that user. But for update, we're doing the reverse. We're checking for that user because only if that user exists, we can update the data for that user. Make sense? And now exactly the same things we'll do because now we want to start. So now that the user, if the user doesn't exist, we'll throw an error. But if the user exists, then you want to start updating the table with the new data. How do you do that? Whatever you've unmarshaled right now, from JSON to unmarshaled to something that Golang understands, now you want to start marshalling it to something that DynamoDB understands. So you already know what you want to use. You want to use the marshal map function. You want to pass u to it because you've just unmarshaled. And which package is it a part of? So it's part of the DynamoDB attribute package. We'll capture it in a variable called AV, or we'll get an error. And now we can easily handle the error. So if error not equal to nil, return nil comma errors dot new error could not marshal item. This one. Really straightforward. Now you just want to create your input item and then you want to just call the DynaClient function. Only 2 steps remaining. So you'll say input is equal to ampersand DynamoDB dot put item input, and the item is equal to AV, comma the table name will be equal to AWS dot string table name. And the last thing is you'll use DynaClient dot put item and you'll pass the input and if error not equal to nil, return nil comma errors dot new error could not dynamo put item, return ampersand u comma nil. So now even my update function is complete, everything looks okay, and all I want to do now is run the go mod tidy command to get all of the packages that are not there. So I think it's taking a while. I can't find my phone anyways. So while that's happening in the background, we can start working on the delete user function. So as you can see, it's all installed. I had a couple of issues actually, as you can see. And most of the issues were because I had a couple of spelling mistakes here. Instead of SDK, I did an SKD, So a small few mistakes I had made. Just make sure you get these right. You can easily get them on AWS SDK Go, documentation, or if I put, mostly I'll put this code on GitHub, so you can just pick it up from there. All right, makes sense? Just pick it up from there instead of typing it all yourself. Because I made a couple of mistakes, so it was taking a while. But now it's installed all these packages. So in your user.go file, everything works perfectly, right? Like we don't know if it works perfectly, but everything looks perfect to me. And all the packages are in place. All you need to do now is work on your delete user function, which is actually the most actually the easiest function. So it takes request events dot API gateway request, comma, table name, which is of type string, Dyna client, which is of type, you already know that, dot DynamoDB API. All right. So what do you want to put in the function definition? You want the email of the user, right? So request dot query string parameters, and the parameter is email. Then you'll create your input to the function, which is of type DynamoDB, and dot delete item input, star DynamoDB dot attribute value. Basically, you're passing the email and then finding the user and deleting that user with it associated to that particular email, right? Nothing complicated. So you'll say AWS dot string, and you pass email to that. After this, you'll say table name, AWS dot string, pass the table name. And now that you have your input ready, just like we've done all other functions, you take the Dyna client, you call the DynamoDB function, which is delete item in this case, and you pass the input to it. Input basically has your query for deletion, which is the email ID. And you get the error. And if there was an error, you'll return errors.new, error could not delete item. Perfect. Otherwise, you just return nil, nothing. Basically, that means that the user has been deleted. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of errors because I'm not using any type checking extension or any Golang extension, right? So there will be a lot of errors here. So I need to start solving them one by one before I deploy it to the cloud. So to find those issues and to fix them, I'll head over to my terminal and I'll head over to the CMD folder and I'll say go build main.go, and starts giving me errors, right? So it says on this file, line number 8, yeah, I can see the issue. It has to be double, right? That's what makes it the OR operator. So you'll run the command again, and now you'll get all these nice errors that we were expecting, right? And now we want to go start solving them one by one. So starting from line 37 all the way to line 145, too many errors. So when it says too many errors, that means that even after you solve these, it'll give you many more errors, right? So this is why I don't really, use extensions, because because Golang takes care of everything. It tells you which exact line, which part, what you're missing. You don't it's a no-brainer, right? You don't have to apply a lot of brains. You just solve these issues, just like Golang wants you to, and everything will run. So that's why I'm so chilled out all the time, man. So if I go back to your code, on line 37, what could be the issue? It's that I have not put comma here and comma here. Basic syntax issues, right? That's what it says. It says basic syntax issues. Here also you need to put a comma. And let's keep putting commas wherever, I think it will need commas. So this needs comma here, which is line 58 in my case. You can check it out where, it is for you. For create user, again, I'll just put a comma here just to be sure. And I'll put a comma in the input part, which is this. All right. And in the update user function, again, let's go to the input area. Here I've put the commas, so I don't see any issues here. And for delete, definitely you need to put a comma here as well as here. So Now if we run it, a lot of the errors have gone away, right? And now you have some other errors. There are some syntax errors also, like 4 syntax errors, and one this one also, that you're not able to refer to this function. So let's try and fix those as well at the same time. So let's have it over back to our code. Let me see the line. First line says 88. Line 88, blah, 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 blah. Yes, m is small, whereas m should be large. What was I thinking? Am I stupid? That I was not able to, that I didn't make the m, large, because obviously the function is Marshall map with the capital M, right? So this just means that no matter how stupid you are, Golang takes care of everything, right? So you don't need to be the smartest guy on the planet. So let's look at other stupid mistakes. So 108, comma missing. It's a syntax error. Super simple, right? It's even telling you expecting comma, right? I mean, how obvious can error statements be? And then people, tell me, download this extension. I don't have to download any extension, man. Golang does everything for me. And missing statement after label, 125. Missing statement after label, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, obviously, the is equal to sign is off. And then 147. Put a comma here after 147. And then unexpected. Yeah, found it. Now let's run it. Now let's see some more errors. Yes, so it found us some more errors. And now you have to go to line number 66, 76, and 140. But these are not syntax errors. So here you'll have to think a little bit as to why there's an error there. So head over back to your code on line 66. Line 66. Yeah, so it says, let's look at the error. It says, cannot use result or items, and something to do with this function called unmarshal map. That is because you're receiving items, not item. You're receiving multiple items, right? So you can't use the unmarshal map function here. You'll just use unmarshal list of maps. Super simple, man. Super simple. 76, line 76. All right. It says blah, 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 blah. Request.body. See, it says request.body undefined. And it also says does not have body with capital B. Right? I mean, you can be the stupidest person on the planet and fix this issue because you just had to make this B capital, right? So that's how intuitive Golang is. And then you go to line number 140. Line number 140. I mean, I can guarantee you that you can't do something like this with any other language, right? It says there's a problem with this function, obviously, because there's a spelling mistake here. Parameters, everything is fixed now. And now let's see. So it gives me another error. It says unmarshal list of map is wrong. Yeah, because I made a mistake again. It should have been unmarshal list of maps, not map. Awesome. So now that your user.go file is sorted, as in it first shows you the syntax errors, you've solved them, then you solve the logical errors, and now it's giving you some issues with the handlers file, right? Handlers.go. It's giving you all these syntax errors. We'll solve them, then it'll give us some logical errors. We'll solve them as well, and then we're good to go. All right. So we're on the right path. And now let's go back to our code. So open up your code and start from line 19. Line 19. Put a comma here. Line 42. 42. Put a comma here. It's because it's saying it's expecting a comma from you, right? And line 54. Put a comma. Line 59. Blah, 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 blah. Put a comma. Line 66 and 72. Line 66, put a comma. 72, put a comma. All right. Now you start getting the real errors, right? The real errors. So line 22, we just solved this issue on the other file. Line 22, because the spelling of parameters is wrong. And now you want to worry about line 9. Line 9. So one thing to notice is that it's line 9, but of another file, API-response.go. So open up the API-response.go file, and here I can see there's an issue. All right, I fixed the issue. It was basically to do with those brackets, and now it's starting to show me issues with main.go file, which is what I want. I want to fix the main.go file issues, but on line 44. Line 44, let me see what's happening. Okay, yeah, I can see it. I can see the issue. It's basically all the cases have to be together. And by mistake, I'd written this outside the bracket, also the switch bracket, and I've included inside. So that error should also go away. And now when I do this, it's created the go build main.go file for me. So let me see if it has. Yeah, I can see the main file. I just have to move it here to my build folder. And I've created the build file without any issues, no errors, right? So now let's start the deployment process. Before you do anything else, you need to first create a zip file. So you'll just come here, you'll say zip -jrm build/main.zip from build/main. So build is your folder, main is the build that you've created for in your folder, and build/main.zip will be the zip file using the zip function. Maybe in your Linux you don't have zip, you'll have to install it using sudo apt-get install zip. So now if we check here, we can see the main.zip file in my build folder. And now we're ready to kind of start uploading it on Lambda, on AWS Lambda. But as you remember, I told you that I have Windows installed. On that I'm running the WSL. On that I'm running this Ubuntu, and on top of that I've built this folder, right? So I need to be able to access this main.zip file from my Windows to be able to install, like upload it on my AWS Golang Lambda, AWS Lambda dashboard. So for that, I'll do something. So in order to help me to do that, I have to run this command, explorer.exe . And now hopefully it should open. Yeah, it has opened up the Explorer at this location for me, and I'll copy this. I'll put this on my desktop. Awesome. And now I can start to deploy this on my AWS console.
So you want to start deploying, but there's one thing I wanted to change, is this table name. So I'll keep this table name the same as my the name of my program, Go serverless YT. Okay, just for consistency's sake, because we'll have to create this table in DynamoDB. And let me just search if I was using the other table name. Sorry, I'll just Control Z, and I'll just see if I was using this table name anywhere else in any other file. No, it's this only place. There's only one place where I was using it. So here the table name has to be changed. You'll say Go serverless YT. Okay, and now is when we start deploying. So log into your console and head over to Lambda. You have to just create function, Go serverless YT. So we're using Golang 1.x. I think we'll have to change the execution roles. Create new role from AWS policy template. So this option is what you have to select, and the role name, Go serverless YT executor. from the templates, you have to choose simple microservice permissions, create function, successfully created, right? Now you want to change the handler. So as you know, our main, the file that we'll be uploading is called the main file. That's what our build is called, right? So we'll have to change the handler to main, upload the zip file and upload it. Go back to AWS and go to DynamoDB. And you will click on create table. Table name. So table name is what you selected here. Go serverless YT. Simple, right? Because we've kept everything with the same name. So, and primary key. So it says enter the partition key name. I think this is the primary key. Yeah, it's the primary key. The primary key in our case is email, which is string, obviously. And everything else is same, and we can just create the database. Active. It's now active, so now we can proceed to the next stage, which is configuring your API gateway. So head over to your API gateway. Create API. You want to build a REST API. Protocol is REST. Select new API here. And now you want to put the API name, which is Go Serverless YT. And you then create the API. From the actions, select create method, select any, and here you'll select integration type Lambda function and check this, use Lambda proxy integration, and give the name of the Lambda function here, which is Go Serverless YT. And you have to also have to ensure this is checked, default timeout. Now we need to deploy our API. So from actions, deploy API. Select new stage. Stage name is staging. And deploy. So this is your URL that you get here, which you will be using right now to test. So let's test it out. I'm expecting some errors to be there, but not a problem. Let's clear our screen. And first we'll have to build this command. So just give me a second. So here are my 4 commands. And obviously this is post, which is creating a user. This is get all users, get a particular user by email ID. And this last command is for update. Now we can use Postman, or you just use curl, which is the same thing, right? And you set your header and you tell it what's the request, which is post, and the data that you need to send, which is email, which is my email address, my name, and my last name. And this is the unique link that I just got. This link is the unique link that I just got from my invoke URL. Okay, so I'll post these commands somewhere. How do I post it? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll upload this project on GitHub, and then in the description, I think I'll just post these commands so that you can just copy and paste them directly. I think that'll be the best option. Or you can just use Postman, man. I mean, you don't even have to use these commands if you don't want to. All right. And similarly for the update, you say it's request put. You give the new data. Is going to find email based on that because emails are primary key, as you already know. And this is my API link. So these are 4 commands. I need one more command, which is the delete command. So I'll change that to this. So you'll get all these in the an API gateway documentation on how to call these APIs. You can get that also. And so I'm just copying those and I'm just changing those commands. All right. So what we'll do now is we'll try and test it. I'm pretty sure there'll be some error, it'll fail, but let's do it anyway. Oh, so it worked. All right, so it created this user, which is amazing. Now let's run the second command. Sorry, this command. I don't know why it's not copying and pasting it. Now we're running the get all users command. So we'll get all the users. So only one user is there, so it's getting that. And then we'll get the particular user. The particular user has this email ID. It'll get that user also for me because there's only one user right now. Yeah, so that's also working. And now we'll work on our put function. So it's taking my email address and changing my first name to la 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 and last name to blah 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 blah, right? So it's done that. So even update is working. And now we have to work on the delete function. So if the delete function works, it won't return anything. So we'll check if that user is still there. So we're getting all the users. So that means delete worked because it's an empty array, right? That same user is not there anymore. Perfect. So that means everything is working. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It's a long video, I know. There's a lot to follow. There's a lot to learn there. And I hope you really enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot in this project. And very soon I'll have one more project coming up with serverless stack, but it's a little more advanced. We'll have multiple Lambda functions. We'll have CloudFormation. We'll have those CloudFormation scripts. So and everything will be through YAML files and then AWS CLI, and we'll also use AWS SAM for the entire setup. So that's going to be really complicated. So make sure you've done the AWS Lambda, that video, and you've done the serverless video, and then you read up a little bit more about how serverless works and all the AWS technologies, and that will really help you in the next upcoming video. That'll be slightly longer, actually much longer, and they'll have like way more complicated project, right? So the point of that is this is like a monolith serverless project, right? That will be serverless microservices project. There'll be API gateway, CloudFormation. There will be a lot more technologies. We'll use AWS SAM for writing all the configuration files. Anyhow, so I hope you're enjoying it, and do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And there are hundreds of videos on Golang on my channel. Check them out. And I also keep sharing some nice advice on your development career. So you keep watching that as well. All right, so see you, and connect with me on LinkedIn. There's the LinkedIn link in my description box below. Thank you.
In this video, we're doing something very interesting. We're building an intelligent chatbot. So till now, we've built many Slack bots, but most of them have had a hard-coded command and response. But in this case, we're building an NLP-aware, completely intelligent Slack bot. So we'll be using 4 different technologies. One is obviously Golang, because we'll be writing the code in Golang. Then we have Slack to interact with the bot. Then we have wit.ai to understand NLP responses, and Wolfram to actually run the computational models and get the responses from the internet. Okay. So Wit is a technology that Facebook has developed. It's very similar to Dialogflow by Google or Lex by Amazon, and you can basically train it to understand different sentences. So, for example, if I want to find out who the president of India is, so you can have different type of queries, right? You can ask him, you can ask the bot, who is the president of India, or who is the president of India now, or who's the current president of India. So all of these things, right? All of these statements, they basically mean the same thing, that who's the president of India right now, right? But then Slack doesn't understand it, Golang doesn't understand it. So Wit is the intelligent NLP part, where Wit can be trained with all these hundreds of different statements to understand that you're basically trying to say the same thing. So it basically creates like a confidence score to tell you that, okay, I have understood the query now, and I understand your question. So Wit is that NLP intelligence engine, right? And then once Wit has understood the query, you can send it to Wolfram. Wolfram is the computational engine. So Wolfram has the answer of who the actual president of India is. Wit doesn't have that answer. Wolfram has that answer. So Wit basically can be trained with hundreds of different sentences to actually understand what your query means, and then it'll send the query to Wolfram, and then we'll get the answer, and then we'll get the answer to Slack. So let me take you through the entire diagram of how we're going to do it. So the user will enter a message. It goes to Slack. And Slack then sends the message to our Golang server. Golang server then sends it to Wit. Wit then sends it again to Golang server, and from there we can again send it to Wolfram, because there's no connection between Wit and Wolfram and Slack and Wit, right? So our Golang server is going to be the connection between all of these things. From Wolfram, we want to send the response to Slack, so it has to go through our Golang servers, right? Everything, I'm sure, makes sense now. And there are going to be some packages that we'll have to use to interact with Wit, to interact with Wolfram, to interact with Slack. So Slacker is my favorite package. If you've done my other previous Slack bot tutorials, I'm sure you know that there are many on my channel, so you can go ahead and do those as well. So Slacker is the package that I often use. So you can look at this, Somali/Slacker, right, on GitHub. So I've kept these tabs open because all of these are important to us. So that's why I've kept all of these tabs open, right? I'll take you through all of these one by one. So Slacker is the wrapper on top of the Slack Go package, which is a wrapper on top of the Slack Bear API, right? So this is like a third level abstraction of how we can build a Slack bot, and this makes our job very, very easy. So that's why I always use Slacker. So now that I've shown you this, I can cancel it out. I can close that tab. Then we'll be using WitGo. So our commands that we get from Slacker, the user that he enters the command, we process it using our Slacker, and then we send it to WitGo, right? Using WitGo, we send it to Wit, and that's how Wit will process it. So WitGo, you can think of it as a wrapper around Wit's APIs written in Golang. So you can use this as functions. All you have to do is just call these functions that are written in WitGo. All right, and now Wit gives us some response that we need to send to Wolfram, right? But the response that Wit gives us has it's a really big JSON, and to process that JSON, it's quite challenging in the sense that if you know how to work with JSON with Golang, you know that it's not very straightforward. You have to use structs sometimes. You have to use unmarshalling and all that. So I found this package called GJSON. So first, let me close WitGo. So I found this package called GJSON. It helps you query JSON very, very easily. So for example, and now this guy is a genius, obviously, so I have to give him that. So Tidwall, or actually there are so many more contributors than him. So these guys are geniuses because they've built a package that helps you take a JSON like this and then just access them like you would in something like JavaScript, right? Which is so simple. So if you wanted to get name, so inside this entire JSON object is this key value pair called name, which is an object itself. So you can, if you wanted name and last, you could just say name.last, right? And you could get access to Anderson. And if you have worked with Golang, you know how difficult it is to actually restructure a JSON object like this and then get an actual access to something like this, right? So this library makes it very easy, and I'm going to use this in this video, and also in the future videos, I'm planning to use this a lot more, so that will save us a lot of time, right? Building all these structs and then unmarshalling it, and then trying to access this value. And it's a lot of work. So we'll use GJSON, right? So now that I've shown this to you, I'll just close it off. And to work with Wolfram, now Wolfram is a big technology, right? It has a lot of APIs. It's quite complicated. So there is somebody who has written a Go Wolfram package for us. Now this looks simple, but as you can see, there's so many structs, right? All these different structs are there that help you to work with, that help you to basically translate or unmarshal the data coming from the APIs. And then it's a big file. It's just one file, but it's a big file, right? So somebody has done it for us. They're calling the Wolfram API and then getting all the data for us, all right? So all we have to do is just call the functions inside the Go Wolfram package, like so, right? So you can create a client, you can get query results. Simple and straightforward. So we'll be using Go Wolfram, like I said, and we'll just close that off right now. And the other thing that we need to use, so you know that the way I manage environment, so I don't, since I make very beginner-friendly videos, I don't try and confuse you with, trying to set your environment. So I just use os.set environment and os.get environment. I do something very, very simple and straightforward. But this is the right way of setting that environment. So you might also know that I'm also a Ruby developer. I've been a Ruby developer for many, many years. And ever since Golang, I started using Golang. I stopped using Ruby many years back. So this is a Go, implementation of Ruby's .env library, which is a very, very famous and very, very popular Ruby gem, right? .env. Here you call them libraries, but in Ruby you call them gems. So this is very, very popular, and this lets you manage your environment variables very easily, right? So all we'll have to do is we'll have to create a .env file, and we'll put all of our keys there, and then we'll be able to just load it simply with go.env.load, and then we can easily use them with os.get and environment variables, right? So this also means that I won't be pushing my environment file into GitHub. So you need to create your own environment file with your own API keys. So pay attention when I show you how to get your API keys, because that can be confusing to some people, right? So this is the the Wolfram portal. Now, one thing that I have to tell you about Wolfram website is it's very slow. It can be a frustrating experience to work with it because the website somehow is stuck in the early 2000s. It's not a new website. It doesn't work like a modern website would, and the API is also kind of shaky. So obviously the Wolfram Go package makes it easy for us, but I'm just telling you because if you can see this, it's still loading since yesterday actually. So don't get frustrated. Just try to be patient, and also it gives you only 2,000 requests per month. So and you can make only 20 apps at one go. Otherwise, you'll have to upgrade. So just make sure you stay within those limits if you don't want to pay a lot of money to upgrade. All right. And I have created these two projects here. So if you want to create a new project, you can just go ahead and say get an app ID. And before that, obviously, you have to create an account in Wolfram Alpha. You have to sign up, and then you have to head over to developer.wolfram.alpha.com. And as you noticed, I clicked get an app ID a long time back, and sometimes you have to refresh it. And sometimes, very weirdly, it would have logged me out, but no, not today. It has not logged me out till now. So anyhow, so I'll just click it again. So now it's asking me for my application name. So I'll say new NLP, all right? So I'll say new NLP bot. This is the YouTube demo bot. If you don't give a description, it won't let you create a new app. So I'll say create an app. So it has given me this app ID, but I won't be using this app ID. I'll be using my old app ID, the one that I had created yesterday, which is the NLP bot. The Wit AI one, which has already has 13 total queries. The reason for this is very simple. With Wolfram, if you've not waited for 24 hours, it won't let you use, as in it gives you a lot of errors sometimes and unpredictable type of errors. So it says, invalid app ID or some error like that. So I looked it up on Stack Overflow. And the answer that I found was that you have to wait 24 hours sometimes, or at least 12 hours for the API to work correctly. So if you create an API key right now, the chances are you won't be able to run this program properly, and it'll say error app ID invalid or something like that. Okay. So that's the thing with Wolfram Alpha. I know there are a lot of quirks with this. So basically, just remember to get your app ID from here, and that's all. That's all you need to do at Wolfram Alpha website. Right, so just copy and paste it with yourself. And then let's come to Wit AI. So here you'll have to log in using Facebook because it's a technology built by Facebook. So we'll say continue with Facebook. It takes a while. So I have all these bots built up, and now we'll create another app called new app, and let's call it then. I already have a new NLP, so I'll just say Wit AI. I'll just call it YouTube demo. All right. So remember to keep it open, and we'll say create, and language is English. And now it has a couple of things on the left side, right? So you have your intents, entities. So we'll go to intents. We'll create an intent, and we'll call it. Let's see if there's a Wolfram intent already. So there's no Wolfram intent. So we'll just call it Wolfram. And next. Right, so we have this intent. Now we'll have to create entities. So we'll create an entity, and we'll find a built-in entity. So we'll look for Wolfram. So the integration between Wit AI and Wolfram is so deep that they actually have an entity called Wolfram search query. So Wit AI would come to know that this is a Wolfram search query and needs to send it to Wolfram. So it'll give us in a relevant format. So we'll say next. And now we have our entity set up, and this role is added by Wit AI themselves. And now whatever you send it to Wit AI, right, these will show up in your utterances. So we won't actually write utterances and train our Wit AI right now. That's not the scope of this video. You can find thousands of videos that train your Wit AI or your Dialogflow bot, right? We won't be training it. We'll be sending it very straightforward questions that will just identify as a Wolfram query and send it forward. So for example, if I said, who is the president of India, right? So with 92% confidence, it has understood this question, right? So we don't have to train it right now, that means. So, but if you wanted to train it for this same query with multiple different statements, you could do that, right? So anyways, we won't be doing this. Like I said, we won't be training it. We'll be just sending it straight queries, which will directly send to Wolfram. So now that I've shown you the go.env package, I'll just delete that. I'll just close that tab as well. And I've shown you this video, which doesn't work anymore. So we'll close it. So we won't be using any of the packages that have been used in this video. We're completely rebuilding everything from scratch. So we'll close this as well. And we just need to keep our these Wit AI and Wolfram tabs open, just in case you need your app ID. So yeah, I've not shown you how to get your app ID in Wit AI, right? So all you have to do, I think, I don't remember correctly. You go to settings, and you will take your server access token. This is the one that you want to take. All right. So just copy and paste that. Copy and keep it for now, at least. Then let's go to our Slack. So Slack, I'll have to go to api.slack.com/apps. And here, if you have done my previous Slack bot tutorials, which there are plenty of, you have built all these bots with me, and today we are building another bot from scratch. And we'll call it the YouTube demo app, right? And I'll select Multech as my space. So it's called YouTube demo, and you have to switch on the socket mode so that it can catch up messages in real time. So we'll say enable, and we'll call it the socket token. Generate, and you need to save this somewhere and keep it. But I'll come back for all of these API keys, but you can keep them somewhere safe if you want. And then we'll go to our event subscriptions. We'll have to switch these on, and we'll have to give it some events to subscribe to. So we'll say app mention, because we'll mention our bot, and then we'll say message.im. So these are the events that the bot will subscribe to, so that it comes to know when something is happening. So like let's say somebody mentions the bot and sends it a message, it will come to know, right? So I'll just say message.groups as well, and I will say message.npm. And I think that is about it. I don't need to add any more events. So always the trick with Slack is add more events than you think you'll need and add more OAuth permissions. So we'll come here and we'll add some OAuth permissions. So for now, I'll just save these changes. This change is saved. Now let's go to OAuth permissions. And here we have to add some more scopes. So these scopes were added based on the events that we subscribe to, but we have to add more scopes, right? So again, with scopes, the trick is to take more scopes from OAuth of Slack than you need. So for example, I need this one here called channels read and chat write, because I wanted to be able to write to a channel, right? And I will say I am read and I am write instant message. I am basically stands for instant message. And I'll say npm I am and npm read and write as well. I might not need most of these permissions, but I'm just going to keep them anyways. Like I said, so if you've seen one of my previous videos of Slack, you know that a lot of errors happen because you don't have enough permissions. And Slack, the problem with Slack is it won't even give you errors, the right errors, right? So you'll keep struggling with the error for a long time and you won't know what happened because you won't get the right error. So, and most of them are to do with permissions. In the sense your bot just won't work and you won't come to know why it's not working. So I think I have all the permissions that I needed, and that is about it for me. And I'm going to install it to my workspace, and asks me if I can give it these permissions. I said allow. So now it's given me a bot user token. So this is important, and in our basic information, the the socket token that we created, even that's important, right? So it's called the YouTube demo. Just remember that. So we'll have to refer it, right? We'll have to mention it in our Slack channel. So if we go to our Slack channel and I say YouTube demo, so YouTube demo is not in this channel yet. So do I want to add it? I'll say yes, add to channel. So add YouTube demo to this channel. Only then we'll be able to interact with it, right? Now, what we'll do is we'll actually start creating our project. So I'm not sure if you can, I think you can see my PowerShell. So even if you're on Windows or which is I'm on Windows and I'm using PowerShell. So even if you're on Ubuntu and using Terminal or Mac using Terminal, the commands will be exactly the same. So what I'll do is I'll say mkdir and YouTube demo NLP. All right. So I'll just go inside that. And here I'll say go mod init and github.com/akhil/NLP bot. So the mod file is initiated like this. So if you're from a JavaScript background, this is very similar to npm init. So it creates a mod file which contains all the package that we'll be using in this project. And this is the direct the absolute link that we'll use to access other files in our project. So I'm not sure why the enter is not working on this. Maybe something to do with my internet. Yeah, so it has created a mod file. Let me just check. Now what we have to do is we have to start getting our packages that we need, the external packages that we'll be using in our project. So you can give these inverted commas, or you don't. Even if you don't give them, it's not a problem. So you'll say github.com/crognol/go Wolfram. If you're from a JavaScript background, this is exactly the same as npm install, and this is the name of the package, and this is the GitHub link for it. So like you have the npm library, the npm website, npmjs.com, where all these packages reside, Golang doesn't have something like that. So you have to get everything from github.com, right? And what we'll also do is we'll get github.com/akhil slash Joho slash dot env. And when we'll also get go get github.com slash the Slacker Slackbot library that we need, and we need the GJSON, the one that allows us to query JSON with Golang slash tidwall slash GJSON. Sorry, you have to write go get in front of it. And then the last one we need is Go, the one created by Alex. So we have all the packages in place, and all we have to do is open up our VS Code and start writing the project, right? And here, obviously, the file that you'll create is main.go. On top, you'll write package main. You'll write import and import all the packages that you need. And here you'll have to write the main function. So if we'll say func main, and the func main will have quite a bit of code. And at the same time, we'll have our .env file. In the .env file, you'll have 4 things. One is Slack bot token. Then you have your Slack app token. Then you have your Vit AI token and your Wolfram app ID, right? So Wolfram app ID, I've shown you how to get it, right? From where to copy it. I already have it copied in some place in my laptop, so I'm just going to come and paste it here. Vit AI token, I've already shown you where to get it from. Copy and paste it here. And then we have our Slack bot and Slack app token. For the Slack bot token, you'll get that in your OAuth and permissions. You'll get your Slack bot token, and in your basic information, you'll get your Slack app token here in socket token that we created. The one that starts with XAPP is your Slack app token. The one that starts with XOXB is your Slack bot token. All right. So now that that's clear, I'm going to copy and paste my sorry, I forgot to copy my tokens, so I'll just copy this. I'll say copy, and this is my Slack app token and Slack bot token. I have to go back to OAuth and permissions and copy it. So our environment file is ready. Now we'll have to import some packages that I know we'll use. When we'll use context encoding slash JSON. We'll use FMT to print out stuff, and JSON to work with JSON log, and OS for our environment variables. And as of now, I need slash Joho slash go dot environment, right? We need other packages as well for working with Slack and Wolfram and Vit, but I'll introduce them one by one. So in our func main, the first thing that we write is go dot environment, and here we'll use the load function to load the environment file. Okay. Then we'll create a bot. So we'll say bot is equal to. So here we have to create a new client for our Slack bot, and that can only be done if you have the Slacker package. So we'll say github.com slash Shomali11 slash Slacker. Okay, so let's create our bot. The bot basically will have Slacker dot new client, os dot get environment, and Slack bot token, comma, os dot get environment, Slack app token. So these are the two things required for our bot. So let me see if the brackets have been properly closed. So we have an extra bracket here by mistake. So I have to remove that. And there's one more extra bracket here by mistake, so we have to remove that as well. So all the squiggly lines have gone away. And there's a squiggly line here with bot. It's saying it's declared but not used, but we'll use it soon. So you don't have to worry about that. And then there are squiggly lines with all these packages. We'll be using all these packages soon. So you don't have to worry about them as well. Okay. Now, since we are in the process of creating these different variables, I think it's a good time to create our WIT AI client and our Wolfram client as well. Or maybe I'll do that after a while. Anyways, so one thing that I have to do is I have to create a function called print command events. If you followed my other Slack tutorials as well, Slack bot tutorials, then you know that this function is simply to print out the events that the bot subscribes to. So whenever we give a command to a bot, it acts as an event and it publishes to the command line. We want it to be published to the command line so that we come to know what's happening. So we'll create this function now. So this function will be created above funcmain. And as you know, we'll call it print command events. So in one of the previous videos, I've already explained the inner dynamics of this function. Basically, you're passing command event here. And you'll say for event, we'll just range over this analytics channel. And we'll print the timestamp of the command itself, the parameters that it received, and the event name. So let's say fmt.println. We'll say command events and fmt.println again, event.timestamp, fmt.println again, say event.command, fmt.println, and event.parameters, like I said, and the event itself. And just an empty line. So our print command events function is ready. Now I had a couple of packages here, and when I pressed save, since I'm using this Golang plugin, it removes all the packages that I'm not using in the code, right? So by mistake, don't press Control S because it'll remove all the packages that we had written here. But it's not a problem. So what this Golang plugin also does is that when I use a package here, it also adds it here on top. So it's a two-way street. Anyhow, so we have written our command for printing the events, the command events, and now we'll start working on our bot.command function, which basically handles the command that we'll send to the bot. But before that, we just have to write in some code that will help us stop the program when we want it to. So we'll say context dot with cancel. Again, this is standard code that we've written in all of our previous Slack bots, right? Slack bot codes. So in case you're new to this channel, there are I won't say hundreds, but there are at least tens of Slack bot tutorials. Do take a look to check them out. Is equal to bot.listen ctx. And if there is an error, that means error not equal to nil, we'll say log.fatal, and we'll log out the error. All right. So like I said, this is standard code, and I'm using the log package here, and now it has installed the log package for me. It's imported that, right? Earlier it was giving a squiggly line here. So we have the outlines of our function ready, and now comes the main part, which you need to pay a lot more attention to. Sorry, it's the bot.command function, which basically helps us to understand the commands that we give to the Slack bot and then work with that. So we'll say bot.command, and here we'll put the command that we'll send to the bot, and here we'll say slacker.command definition, and inside command definition is where all the magic will happen. All right. So this function, obviously the bot.command function, is part of the Slacker library, and this is the syntax, the requirements of the function itself, and it has a description. So we'll say, let's say, send any question to Wolfram, and it has an example. Again, like I said, this is all coming from the Slacker library. It's not something that we are building up. All these are requirements of the Slacker library. So this is an example, right? Example question. These are both are static variables. These are just the description and the example of how this bot will be used, right? These are not dynamic. So we'll say handler. Handler is our function that helps us to work with the bot, or with the different commands. And when I pressed enter, it filled in all these things for me automatically. So in case you're not using a Golang plugin and it's not filled in these for you, just make sure you get this right. Otherwise, this code will also be on GitHub, and you can easily pick it up from there. So we'll say query, which is a variable, and we'll say request. So handler functions, if you've seen my REST API videos of Golang, you know that you have request and response objects, right? So request is what the user is sending to this function, to our Golang program. And in the request, you will have parameters. If you've ever worked with REST APIs, you know what parameters are. So the parameter that we're looking for, let's say it's called a message, right? And here that means we have to give a query, something like that. So we'll say query for bot, right? Put a dash here. And to pass a param in a function to Slack, when you pass a param, you have to pass it like this. So we'll say message. And so what you're telling to Golang is that in the request, there'll be a param called message. So when we send a command to our Slack bot, it'll be like query for bot, and then we'll put a dash, and we'll put the actual statement. And the statement itself will be captured inside query. And then this query is going to be sent to, wherever, like VitAI and Wolfram. Now there is a there seems to be an issue here. I think we have to put a comma. That's what the VS Code is telling me. So I've put a comma here, and the squiggly lines have gone away. So everything looks good. And query, there's a squiggly line here because it says it's declared but not used, right? Now, what we'll do is we'll come here. We'll say client.parse. Now client is going to be our VitAI client, which we've not created till now. So I think before I create my client, what I'll do is I'll show you what the query looks like in the command line. So I'll say fmt.println, and I'll say query. So when we send this query to the bot, it's just going to print it out. And then let's also keep a response here. And the response will be very simple, it'll just be received, all right? Now, reply gives us a squiggly line because R has to be capital. And now everything works, except for this. I don't know why I could not import this package. I think we'll have to just run go mod tidy and reinstall it back again. So I'll just go to my terminal and I'll say go mod tidy. Even if I had installed the package, I don't know why it wasn't recognized here. So anyhow, this is what the code looks like as of now, and there seem to be no errors. So what we'll do now is we'll start this program. So we'll say go run main.go and let's see what happens. Okay, now we'll head over to our Slack and to our YouTube demo app. We'll say query for bot and we'll say what is the capital of India. So all we need to know now is that yes, it was able to get the message. So message now is what is the capital of India. So it's able to read it. It's also able to print it out, right? So everything works as expected. And this means we can now start writing the code. So now we'll create our Wit AI client. To do that, we need to create a variable called client out here. So let's say client and the walrus operator, and then we'll say Wit AI. We don't have Wit AI in our project, so let's get Wit AI in our project. So we'll say Wit AI, and the package will be github.com/witai/witgo/v2. Now we had installed this package, but there's a possibility that Golang wasn't able to get it. It's okay, we'll again run go mod tidy, not a problem. So coming back here, we'll say Wit AI dot new client. We'll say os dot get environment and Wit AI token. Now again, the reason that why Golang is not able to get this for us is because there's some issue with my Go path, obviously. And since this is my Windows laptop, I won't try to fix it. I use my Linux laptop most of the times. So just bear with me when I run go mod in it. Don't worry, it'll install it back again for us. So here we have our client Wit AI, and it uses the Wit AI token in our environment file. All right. So far so good. Now it's giving us a squiggly line here because we have not used our client package. And that's what we'll be using here. So we'll say client.parse. And inside parse, we'll write Wit AI, ampersand Wit AI, sorry, in small. What's wrong with my caps? Wit AI dot message request. And inside message request, you'll have to send a query. And the query will be what you get from here, from your Slack bot. So let me show you the diagram again, all right? The user sends a message, it goes to Slack, Slack gives it to Golang server, and now we have to send it to Wit, right? So Slack has given it to Golang, which is query, and the query has to be passed to Wit AI. So I hope everything makes sense now. And here, we're going to print this out. So we'll come here and we'll take these values in a variable called message, comma blank, and we'll print out the message here. So now we'll run the program again. I'll show you why I've done this. I'm not sure why it's telling me to get this package when I need the v2. And if I say command S and I run go mod tidy, I'll just stop this program for now. I'll say go mod tidy, and it has got the v2 for us. Right, so everything works now, no errors here. So we'll run the program again. Oh yes, sorry. I'll run the program again. I'll say go run main.go. And here we'll say at YouTube demo query for bot. What is the capital of India? And it's able to get the message. And now this is the reply that's coming from VitAI. This needs to be structured. I'm sure you agree with me that this needs to be structured because this is not something that Wolfram will be able to understand. So we'll stop this program here. And I'll just open up the VS Code editor again. So the message that's now in MSG, we have to do something about it, right? So we'll say, we'll create a variable called data. We'll put a dash here. The Walrus operator, and we'll say JSON.Marshall indent. Basically, you want to convert that, whatever response that you saw, you want to convert that into JSON. So this adds the right spaces and everything. So about 4 spaces is the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And this will add those. If you've seen JSON objects, you'll see that all of the key value pairs, they're covered in these type of inverted commas, right? So that's what the double inverted commas. Sorry. So that's what the indent function does. So JSON is giving a squiggly line here. So if I put Control S, then it should give me the encoding.json package. Yes, so I get that. So there's only one error left, which is data, which is basically saying that I'm not using data. And I'll create another variable called rough, and I'll say convert whatever data I get into string format. And we're going to print out basically this rough variable. Now let's see what happens. We'll run the program again. And here we'll say at YouTube demo query for bot. What is the capital of India? It does say received, and here we can see that we get a nice JSON object that now we can work with. And the thing that you need access to is basically inside entities, inside this Wolfram search query, and inside that array, inside that object, inside the array, and inside value. That's what you need the reference to, right? And this value, this is the thing that we need to send to Wolfram. Now, there is also a confidence score, which is of 92%. So 92 divided by 100 is 0.92. So it gives us a range between 0 and 1. So anything above 80% or even 70% is good. And we could have taken our program further, and we could have checked the confidence score and then given the query to Wolfram. But it's not a problem since we have not trained our bot to understand these queries as of now. We won't, and our VitAI is directly going to forward these queries to Wolfram. We don't have to worry about the confidence score right now. Okay, so you'll stop this program now, and it does give a little error, a problem time to stop it. And here you'll come back here again, and now, like you need access to this thing, right? Inside entities, inside this, inside the array, inside the object, inside value. Now, to get access to this in Golang is very difficult. It's not like JavaScript. You just start accessing this, working with this object directly, because Golang does not have native support for JSON. because JSON is JavaScript object notation. So only JavaScript has native access to it. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable called value, because we need that value, right, inside entities. And we'll use our package, the JSON package. And with the JSON package, you can just run these get queries to get whatever you want. So we are going to run the get query on this variable called rough. And we want to say entities. So I want access to my entities. And I want access to this with $wolfram search query and colon wolfram search query, right? So let me write that here. With $wolfram search query colon wolfram search query. Okay, so just check if the spelling of wolfram is okay. Looks good. And now we want to access the first value of this array, right? This is an array, so we have access to this now. We want access to this first value of the array. So we do that in an array, you do that by .0, right? Because that's the first value. So with this package, with the help of this package, you can easily access the values inside an array. So you'll say .0 and .value. So let me show it to you again. So .0, which is this object, and inside that is .value, and you'll have access to what is the capital of India. It's just as simple as that. Now what we'll do is we'll actually print out this value so that you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And now we'll go here again, we'll start the program again. Okay, so it's telling me to get this package, so let me go back here. Okay, again I'll run go mod tidy, and we'll run the program again. Okay, and here we should say again the same query for bot, what is the capital of India. Here you can see we got the value, the exact string that we want to send to our Wolfram. We have it here. We were able to access it using our JSON package. Makes sense? So with the help of this bot, right, we'll be able to send it these kind of questions like who's the president of US, who's the president of India, who's the president of US, what is the capital of India, who's the capital of China. It'll give us the exact right answers because Wolfram has the ability to process that kind of information and give the right answers. So let's see how it does that. Now I'll create another variable called answer, and this basically converts the value that I just received here into string. Okay, because string is what we have to send to our Wolfram client. Now that means we'll have to create a Wolfram client, right? So we'll come here and we'll say Wolfram client is equal to ampersand wolfram.client. Inside that, here in this case there will be these squiggly brackets, and we'll say app id os.get environment, and we'll say wolfram app id. All right, so it doesn't, our Golang program doesn't have access to this. So let's fix that. So it's added that already, actually. Good. And then it's giving me error here. Okay, I think I'll have to create a Wolfram client, actually. A variable called Wolfram client. So this I have to make sure the C is capital. C has to be capital here. And here I'll have to create a constant. Wolfram client and Wolfram dot client. All right, and the Wolfram client comes from here, Everything looks good. Right. Now there seems to be an error here. I don't know why. Missing constant value syntax. Sorry, it has to be a variable actually, not a constant. So it's a variable. And yeah, so it has an error here, it has an error here in this place, and it has an error here because we're declaring it but not using it. So now I'll come here to answer. Actually, before that, let me just stop this program and go mod tidy again so that we get the Wolfram package. And now the errors mostly have gone away except for these two errors, right? The Wolfram client. So the Wolfram client we have to use right now. So I have the answer here in a which is basically string and the value in string format, and I'll say Wolfram client dot get spoken answer query. Now there's a confusion here that many people have, is that the person who's created this library, it should have said get spoken answer query, but it says get spoken in T. There's a small T here, so just make sure you write that T, otherwise you will face a lot of problems. So here we'll pass the answer, comma, the answer that we get here, and Wolfram dot metric, comma 1000. All right, and we'll assign this to two different things. One is the response and one is an error. And if there's an error, which means if error not equal to nil, we will print out there is an error. And the response, we will send our response object, the res, right? And to me, everything looks okay. And there seems to be no error as of now. But only when we'll run the program, we'll come to know. So yeah, everything looks good. And what we'll now do is, let me check if there's any more packages to be installed. I don't think so. Okay, so let's run this code. Go run main.go. And to our YouTube bot, we'll say query for bot, what is the capital of India? So it can reply to us, the capital of India is New Delhi, India. And YouTube bot, query for bot, what is the capital of China? It takes a while because it goes to wait and then goes to Wolfram. See, capital of China is Beijing, China. So as you can see, our bot can understand anything, you know, it's really, really powerful. So let's say query for bot, who is President of India? At YouTube, query for bot, who is the President of Brazil? So as you can see, our bot can do anything. It can basically find the answers for all of these very difficult questions difficult in the sense not for human beings, or sometimes even for human beings, because I didn't know who the president of Brazil is, right? So you can get all of these answers from using your Wolfram API. So I hope you learned a lot in this video today and you built something really exciting. And this is a very, very powerful bot. So if you're, by the way, if you're somebody who's looking for a job in Golang, I don't think there's a project that's better than this to show off your skills, right? Because you're using Golang, you're using Slack, you're using and these awesome packages, right? Environment packages and the JSON package, and you're using Vit, you're using Wolfram, and then the sky is the limit with Vit, right? I didn't show you how to train your Vit bot, but you can basically watch any other video on Vit. There are many videos that focus on just how to use Vit, and you can actually scale this bot up to a whole new level, right? So I hope you learned a lot in this video, and we built a bot that can basically do anything, right? It's an NLP bot, and it's connected to Wolfram, so it can understand anything, it can do anything. So I won't say it can understand anything because we have not trained our Vit API, but if you trained it really well, it would be able to do anything.